2005 was the top of the bell curve for great games. It was the year that gave us Shadow of the Colossus, Resident Evil 4, Psychonauts, Time Splitters Future Perfect, and Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. The film was a massive production, had a $200 million budget, which actually at the time made it the most expensive film ever made. It had an all-star cast, including Academy Award winner Adrien Brody and
chubby, agile guy
Jack Black. Special effects were done by Weta, and the score was by James Newton Howard. By all accounts, Universal were not messing around with this film. And when it came to the computer game tie-in, it's obvious that Universal were expecting for King Kong to be this big multimedia thing. Ubisoft and Universal threw so much money at the development of Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Beyond Good and Evil director Michel Ancel was given the helm, the entire film cast voiced the game, and Peter Jackson himself was even overseeing the game's development. Now, for a film tie-in, 2 Oscar winners and a GDC nominee is some pretty heavy talent. The scale here and the ambition that Peter Jackson and Ubisoft obviously had for this game was very real. 2005 was the year the Xbox 360 launched, and so Peter Jackson's King Kong was lined up as a launch title. Now that practically guaranteed the game would be a smash hit because it would be bundled in with Microsoft's new console. All this money, this talent and ambition, that clearly paid off because Peter Jackson's King Kong sold a huge amount of copies at launch, and it attracted high praise with reviewers of the day. Now, as an aside, just a bit of history for you here. We've been doing this channel for a few years, and the first year we were doing it, I was reviewing old PS2 games. Now my mate Johnny comes to me and he says, "Matt, you've got to play this game. You've got to put it on your channel. It's the best game ever. It's called Peter Jackson's King Kong." And I'm like, "Well, mate, come on, steady on. Best game ever is a bit of a stretch, isn't it?" He's like, "No, man, I'm serious, right? You get to be Adrien Brody, you get to shoot dinosaurs, you get to be the monkey. Seriously, mate, best game I've ever played." And it's probably worth mentioning here that John isn't much of a gamer. He demonstrably doesn't know the difference between Tekken and Mortal Kombat. He played his PS3 over a SCART cable despite having an HD telly, and the only game he owns on PS4 is the 2015 Battlefront. So yeah, that's John in a nutshell. My point though is that if Peter Jackson's King Kong is a game that my mate John likes so much, and the larger games press crowd seem to think is better than Resi 4, then what am I not seeing? I played the game and I thought it was fucking garbage. How has history not been as kind to this game as it has been to, say, God of War or Resi 4? What about it just makes it so underwhelming? Am I the arsehole? Is there something maybe that we can learn from King Kong that shines a light on modern AAA development? I've also spoken about movie tie-ins on this channel before. Being slavishly tied to somebody else's product or somebody else's release schedule can honestly really hamper a game. There are some great ones, but most of them do falter. Now, Peter Jackson himself said that it was important to him that the King Kong game would have very strong collaborative links with his film. So he made sure that he shared all the concept art and all the creative resources that the film crew had with Ubisoft. It was Peter Jackson's wish, in fact, that the film and the game felt strongly connected. He wanted them to feel like they shared the same universe. They were, cut from the same creative cloth. He wanted the game to expand on the mythos he'd shown in his film, and he was excited at the idea of having his own expanded universe. The game even had some creatures in it which were actually cut out of the film. And when speaking about working with Ubisoft, Jackson specifically praised Michel Ancel's storytelling skill and his imagination. He said that the storyline and the characters in Beyond Good and Evil got him so emotionally involved that it convinced him that Ancel was the man he wanted to work with on the King Kong game. Now, if you don't know the story of King Kong, the basics is it's a film crew that gets shipwrecked on an island. They bring a massive gorilla back to New York City, and this doesn't work out well for anybody. On the back of the game's box, the immediate promise here is players man, players Kong. That gives us a tantalising insight into the 2 game modes on offer. One is a survival story of Adrien Brody's character escaping Skull Island. One bit is Kong breaking jaws. Now, from the game's inception, Ancel and Jackson thought it would be important to balance the survival horror elements of Adrien Brody's journey with the bombastic monkey smashing action of Kong sections, and so they wanted to focus more on the human aspect. And so about 80% of the game is made up of the player's man bit. You're Adrien Brody with his shipwrecked mates. You're trying to survive and to ultimately escape from Skull Island. Peter Jackson's idea about Ubisoft's shared sharing the creative resources of his film company was definitely the right move here, because the level and the creature designs, they're fantastic. These rain-slicked ruins, these spooky jungles, these dark-ass caves, really good. They're populated with dinosaurs, giant centipedes, big evil crabs and all that stuff. It's all really well realised, and it's actually pretty scary. The visual style is contiguous with the film, and really this is one of the game's biggest strengths. You've got this moody lighting and atmospheric effects. It heightens the tension to the point where actually the game feels more tense in some parts than actually the film even managed. And there's some really great sound design as well. One of my favourite bits of the game, in fact. Ubisoft made some really good and easily identifiable creature sound effects. They really get under your skin. When you're skulking around in a cave and you've got no ammo and you hear that clicking sound of one of the game's massive centipedes, it's actually spooky as all fuck, man. Survival horror was still finding its feet in 2005. The PS2 era is now pretty famous for it actually, but at the time it was still a pretty fledgling genre. Ubisoft had released their own survival horror game, Cold Fear, only a few months before, and most other survival horror games at this time were still like floundering around just one silly mechanic. Peter Jackson's King Kong could have been a key player in the burgeoning survival horror genre. Surviving the most hostile island on Earth sounds like a great premise for a game, had Ubisoft just concentrated on those nice promising bits that I just mentioned. And unfortunately, the Adrian Brody bits of the game suffer from that big budget curse. By shoehorning in some cookie cutter examples of what was available in 2005, Ubisoft broadened the mass appeal of the game, but they moved away what could have made this game truly great. Rather than drilling down into that concept of survival, Peter Jackson's King Kong comes across really as just like a brown FPS hybrid with some basic puzzle solving and survival elements bolted on. Being that it's set in the 1930s, Peter Jackson's King Kong gives you these period accurate weapons, things like the Luger, a pump action Winchester, a bolt action Mauser, and the classic Thompson SMG, complete with the golden age of organised crime drum magazine. Now, like most survival games, the base movement speed is sluggish and there's sod all ammo anywhere. Fine, no change there. But the back of the box tells us that we're going to need to use weapons, traps, and the rest of the team. Now, as a core concept, that's fantastic, right? I mean, that's proper survival. It just doesn't happen. I don't remember a single trap in the whole game. The levels are littered with loads of spears though, and you can set the spears on fire and they deal double damage, or you can use then that to set the level on fire, but is that a trap? All of the game's puzzles, in fact, involve throwing spears at stuff or setting fire to stuff. It's usually to clear a path or maybe to kill off some of the tougher enemies. The only way that I found that you can actually work with the team was from time to time you can swap weapons with them, and there are scripted sections where they open big doors for you. That's about it. For a survival game, Peter Jackson's King Kong is surprisingly easy. The Gribblies are easily killed. There's usually a good supply of spears even if there's no ammo, and Adrian Brody has got magical regenerating health. So going from place to place shooting centipedes and throwing spears at dinosaurs, it's never really a proper challenge. The main way the game tends to enforce challenge in later stages is just to throw these artificial difficulty spikes at you, things like instant death pitfalls or just hordes of enemies and sod all weapons or ammo. With that said though, there are some genuinely fantastic set piece segments which do dig into that core concept. The best of these is a segment where you're escaping some velociraptors by using this maze of ruined tunnels. The raptors can't fit down the little corridors, so you're safe when you're in them, but there are these big open spaces where you'll need to bolt between two bits of cover, so you can either create a diversion or you can just run like hell. It's heart pounding and I loved it. It was brilliant. I would have really appreciated more sections like this in the game, really digging into the idea that this is the most hostile environment on Earth. Everything here wants you dead, and making it 10 feet down the path is a genuine accomplishment. Unfortunately, there are just so few ways of using your wits to survive on Skull Island, and to me, that kind of gameplay would have really fed into this kind of survival light vibe that Ubisoft were going for. The shipwrecked crew with low resources having to scrounge and fight to survive. Ubisoft could have really doubled down on that, but despite the high points I mentioned, the core loop just lacks focus, you know? It just comes across as a bit lackluster. There's not enough ammo here for it to be an action game, and there's not enough tension for it to be a horror game. The best bits are when you get to be the monkey. I mean, being a giant gorilla definitely flies in the face of the survival horror vibe that the game was probably going for. It's just a big punch fest from start to finish, but it's very, very enjoyable. This is probably because the Kong sections are an oasis of like pure fun in what is otherwise just a bit of a lackluster survival FPS. One thing that I found very interesting though is the way Peter Jackson's King Kong plays with scale. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other games where you can competently play as a squishy human being at one time and then at other times as a massive oversized monster. I can think of no games where you can do that and share the same enemy types. That's actually pretty cool, man. It's interesting to view one enemy but from these two different perspectives. When you meet V-Rexes in the game, it's a case of, shit, let's get out of here. V-Rexes can't be killed, that none of the human weapons can hurt them. The only way to get through these segments of the game is like these timing puzzles. You know, there'll be something that needs to be done within a certain amount of time, and it's down to Adrian Brody to distract the V-Rexes. But when you're Kong, it's just about smashing them to death with your big monkey hands. I think it would have been interesting to incorporate Kong's segments in a similar way. You know, during the human story, Kong can't be hurt, so he has to be avoided by using the environment or creating distractions, etc. And then maybe during the Kong sections, it would be you playing as Kong trying to find and, I guess, eat the human beings. Being both the cat and the mouse might be weird, but that would be quite a compelling way to structure a survival horror game. Anyway, back on track. Unfortunately, the Kong segments are just too few and far between. They're a bit like your dad's sex life. The Kong sections, they don't come around anywhere near long enough, and when they do, it's all over a bit too quickly. And then you're back to being boring old Adrian again. It's like, ugh, really? Let me just like bust through this because I just want to get back to being the monkey. Now, because I've seen the film and because I know the story, the main reason I even bothered slogging through all of this game was to get to the bit at the end. You know, the bit where I get to be Kong, scaling the Empire State Building and swatting planes out of the air. Fantastic. And let me tell you, it was a slog. About halfway through, the game just gets so repetitive. It's the same old puzzles, the same old mechanics, the same gameplay over and over. Every level is just the same drudgery. And then there's literally 15 minutes in New York City. Literally 15 bloody minutes. 10 hours of mediocre gameplay, and the Empire State Building is just not that good a payoff. But like I said, Peter Jackson's King Kong, it sold all those units. It got those rockin' reviews. Peter Jackson's King Kong was praised in 2005 for its cutting-edge visuals, its cinematic scope, and the Hollywood quality of those deliverables. Now, yeah, if you look at it on those merits, then there is a lot of good here. I already mentioned the great creature designs and the sound effects. It's also got a great score. I didn't mention that, but that's something that I even noticed when playing it. The game's visual appearance is this now famous, cinematic palette. We call it Brown Town nowadays, but it was a stylistic decision made at the time. It might be passé now, but in 2005 this was pretty cutting edge stuff. Fair play. The game's HUD is disabled by default. This is actually a pretty brave choice. I'm all for it personally. It's a creative decision. It definitely goes against the grain, but it does give the game a more cinematic feel. Adrian Brody just kind of says out loud how many bullets he's got left in his gun. Fine, I guess. There's some obvious investment here in the attention to detail in the presentation of Peter Jackson's King Kong, but I can't help but feel the filmmaker's eye was not necessarily on the ball when it came to translating what makes a good film into what makes a good computer game. The voice acting, for instance, is painfully mediocre. Jack Black is absolutely rinsed because he is the only actor who even remotely sounds like he's trying, so Ubisoft definitely got their money's worth out of him. I actually assumed that Ubisoft had got a rubbish Adrian Brody sound-alike to record his lines. I looked it up on IMDb and it's the real Adrian Brody. Me, is he phoning it in? Now, it could well be that these particular screen actors are just not that well versed in voice acting. Now that's fair enough. Voice acting requires a very specific set of skills and it's different to screen acting. That's why you don't often see many actors doing both. Now this could be the reason the voice acting lacks that emotional punch, that emotional quality that you would expect from a Michel Ancel game. Peter Jackson spoke highly of Ancel's ability to create these believable and emotional stories, but these qualities are nearly absent in Peter Jackson's King Kong. The survival games massively benefit from having an emotional investment in the characters. Now, considering how much time you spend rescuing these idiots from scorpions, at no point are you actually spurred on to save them. You know, it's just a fail state if they die, despite the fact that none of them have any real impact on the story. Maybe if like each of them had unique abilities that you needed to use at certain points, then yeah, it would make sense, but actually they're all just rubbish at looking after themselves. They don't do anything to help, and I don't care about them at all. Or the other side of that argument is Ubisoft could have just gone the complete other way. You know, sod the emotional beats and the survival gameplay, let's just have a laugh. If you've ever seen a monster film, then you know that there's usually that kind of sense of irony. You know, films like Skull Island or Pacific Rim, you know, they know what they're making is inherently absurd, so they just embrace the silliness and they roll with it. Peter Jackson's King Kong, though, it's executed with such a straight face. You know, it's so deadly serious about a giant monkey who fights dinosaurs with his bare hands. There's just no sense of fun at all. I spent 10 hours throwing spears at dinosaurs and punching giant snakes, and at no point did I stop to think how much fun I was having. I really can't believe at this point that Peter Jackson's King Kong was a game directed by Michel Ancel. Beyond Good and Evil is one of my favourite PS2 era games. It's constantly referred to as one of the best games of all time. I don't even know actually if Michel Ancel being on this game makes the game better or worse. I can't figure out how a filmmaker and a game director of such high acclaim can come together and make something so bland. You've got two worlds colliding here, two giants in their respective fields collaborating on one project. It's a runaway success on paper, but apparently at no point during the production, nobody ever said, wait a minute, I don't give a about any of these characters. This isn't fun, this isn't tense, this isn't engaging, it isn't any of the words that 2005 game journalists like to use. And I think this is indicative of what I've covered before about 2005. I think this was the year the industry started moving away from creativity and from niche gameplay and moving towards big franchises and big money moves. Yet there was obviously so much money thrown into this game, licensing the film rights, an Oscar-winning voice cast, the directorship of Michel Ancel and Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson's name is on the box. We could have had a really tense survival game combining the cinematic efforts of Peter Jackson and the emotional chops of Michel Ancel. What we got was a watery half measure shoehorned into a pretty dull action game. And for the most part, if you played this when it came out, I can see the appeal. 1 minute you're Adrian Brody Tommy gunning a massive crab, the next minute you're a giant monkey giving the people's elbow to a dinosaur. Again, on paper, what's not to like? The bitter pill here though is that there are better survival shooters and there are better monkey smash 'em ups on the same platform. Peter Jackson's King Kong is a massive missed opportunity. It might have had one of the biggest budgets of all time, but it won't be remembered among the greats. My closing verdict is that Peter Jackson's King Kong is worse than Tom Hiddleston's acting in King Kong Skull Island, but it's better than the really racist blackface in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to The Game Show.
Perfect.